Welcome to Far Eastern University. Here are some reminders from the FEU Office of Education Technology. Join 15 minutes before the start of the event. Make sure to dress appropriately. Remember that this is a formal engagement in an online setting. Check your Wi-Fi connection before joining. Familiarize yourself with features you may need to use, such as mute, unmute, stop-start video, and screen share. Mute your mic when not talking. Use the raise hand button if you want to speak. Find a quiet place without interruptions. Be aware that you are on camera. Avoid doing things that may cause distraction. Use appropriate equipment for the webinar. If you're using your mobile phone, please
Recording in
use
progress.
use the noise that they pick in your location. Please avoid using a speaker. When asking a question, always state your name and your institute department first before throwing in your questions. Also, please make your voices clearly heard. If you are tuned into our social media accounts, please state your nickname, department, and your question. Do not spam the chat box. Always be courteous and do not engage in a chat with others while the webinar is ongoing. The organizers reserve their right to disengage anyone who will not follow the guidelines. We are now ready to start our event. Please stand by for the Philippine National Anthem, followed by the FEU Multi-Faith Prayer.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Philippine National Anthem.
Bayang magiliw, peles ng sinangana, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyang ka ng magiting, sa manlulubi, di ka pasisingil. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bakaw, may hinagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislat ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdilingin. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pang may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw na lumayan at ipagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang bibigaya na pa ay mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Glory to you, Almighty,
for gathering
us today.
Give us the fortitude
to conquer life's challenges.
Inspire us to excel
And be upright in everything we do.
guide us to remain united
in diversity,
to serve.
And love one another. Amen.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants here on Zoom and to all our live viewers on our Facebook pages from the different parts of the Philippines and the world. We're currently live streaming on the official Facebook pages of Far Eastern University, FEU Institute of Education, and FEU Institute of Education, Graduate Studies, and Transnational Education. Welcome to the Philippines and welcome to Far Eastern University. This is the FEU IE GSTE series of expert talks, or SET, a professional development initiative designed to provide FEU faculty and students with valuable insights and knowledge from industry experts to enhance their professional skills and expertise. I am Romualdo, the current chair of the FEU Graduate Studies Institute of Education, and it is my honor and pleasure to be your moderator for today's event. This is SET's third edition, and we are very much honored to have with us one of the biggest names in the world today. To begin this online event, let's listen to the welcoming message from Professor Dr. Maria Teresa Trinidad Tino, Far Eastern University's Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to everyone. I am pleased to welcome all of you to today's lecture by Professor Noam Chomsky. Today's event, I am told, is the first time ever that Professor Chomsky will be speaking to a Philippine audience. And as such, it is not surprising that this event generated a lot of interest and excitement. And I apologize for the delay earlier. We're not used to handling this many requests through our Zoom room. Although everyone in the audience today is probably familiar with Professor Chomsky, I'm not sure everyone is familiar with the host of this event, Far Eastern University. So please allow me a minute or two to tell you about our university, FEU. FEU was founded here in Manila in 1928 when the Philippines was a colony of the United States. It was founded principally to educate and empower Filipinos to prepare them for self-government. Its goal then was to create dedicated professionals, accountants, nurses, doctors, architects, teachers, who could help build our young nation, at the time not yet independent. For many decades, FEU functioned much like a professional school, but recently, through a number of national, internal, and other external changes and reforms, FEU has been reflecting on and recalibrating its role as a university. We have been working hard of late to get our students and faculty to think more about social issues and its relation to history, culture, and language. Some years ago, for example, we instituted a program called the FEU Learning Journey, where every single FEU student works with a mentor to navigate questions about what they have learned in the classroom and how it connects to their community, to their aspirations, to their history, their culture, and their values. We have also instituted a number of programs to encourage research, innovation, and even reflection. It is therefore quite fitting, and it is also with great pleasure that we welcome Professor Chomsky to speak to us today. We at FEU, who aspire to build an institution of rigorous scientific thinking in the interest of making a more just community, will profit from hearing Professor Chomsky, who has worked a lifetime on understanding and explaining language. Please allow me to say that when I was required to read Professor Chomsky in graduate school and reading him again recently to prepare to listen to him today, I have always found delight in his scholarship that is at once rigorous, dense, and packed with information and insights, but also relevant, positive, life-affirming, and ultimately delightful. Thank you, Professor Chomsky, for speaking to us today and to the FEU community and to all the Filipino and Southeast Asian linguists, thinkers, and curious minds who are here today to listen to Professor Chomsky. Thank you as well for being here. Let me not say any more so that we can get on with the lecture, which many of us have been eagerly anticipating. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, SVP Tino, for the warm welcome. And now, ladies and gentlemen, on to this dream come true moment that we've been waiting for. It's my biggest honor to introduce to you our speaker for today's event. Noam Chomsky is a name that needs no introduction. As one of the most influential thinkers of our time, his ideas have sparked intense debate and controversy across a wide range of fields, from linguistics to politics and philosophy. With a razor-sharp intellect and a fearless commitment to truth and justice, Chomsky has spent his life challenging the status quo and pushing us to think more deeply about the fundamental questions that shape our world. Whether you agree with his ideas or not, there is no denying that he is a towering figure in the world of ideas whose impact will be felt for generations to come. Ladies and gentlemen, in flesh with us right now is Professor Dr. Noam Chomsky to deliver his talk titled Language and the Miracle Creed. Hello, Prof. Chomsky. Good evening. Welcome to the Philippines and to Far Eastern University.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I wish I was with you in person, but circumstances don't permit it. One of these days, I hope. Time is brief. There's a lot I'd like to cover, so I'll have to keep to a sketchy, rather informal account. The long-term goal of theoretical inquiry is explanation, not just description. Description is hard enough. Descriptive inquiries seek to show that this is the way things are. Explanation seeks to show why things are this way and not some other way. Much more ambitious endeavor, but it's the goal to keep in mind. It's important to keep in mind right now. You're surely aware of the enormous excitement about chatbots. They may be useful, may be harmful, like other technical achievements, but contrary to the many extravagant claims, they cannot in principle tell us anything about language, learning, cognition generally. There are many reasons for this, but one reason is they do not tell us why things are this way and, crucially, not some other way. They work just as well for pseudo-languages that children cannot learn and those that they learn almost reflexively. So therefore, they tell us nothing. It's as if a biologist were to say, I have a new theory of organisms. It lists many organisms that exist, many that can't possibly exist, but I can tell you nothing about the difference. That's large language models. Well, returning to the attempt to understand something about the world, language in this case, inquiry proceeds at two levels. One level is concerned with individual languages. The second, higher level, is concerned with the general faculty of language. I'll just call it FL for short. FL is the innate endowment that enables a language to be acquired and to be used. The theory of FL is called universal grammar, UG. It's adapting a traditional term to a new context. Well, at the first level, the study of individual languages, inquiry seeks a grammar of the language, a description of the properties of the language. An adequate grammar must at the very least determine the grammatical sentences of the language. In technical terms, that means provide what's called a recursive enumeration of the sentences of the language. Beyond that, it must yield what has been called the basic property of language. A language is a digital infinity of hierarchically structured expressions, each of which determines a thought, each of which can optionally be externalized in some sensory motor medium, usually, though not necessarily, sound. Well, a bold thesis would be that the generation of thought by the internal language is entirely separated from externalization, an ancillary process. I'll actually assume this. I'll return to strong reasons to suppose that it's correct. In this conception, the internal language consists of the computational rules that satisfy the basic property along with what's called formal semantics. It's more accurately termed logical syntax. It's an important matter that I'll put to the side for lack of time. The system for generating thought we can call I language, Of course, it's an internal system coded in the individual brain. Well, understood this way, the study of language conforms to a long tradition. Goes back to classical Greece, classical India, continued through the 19th century. Throughout, the core of the tradition regarded language as fundamentally a system of thought, audible thought, in the phrase of the 19th century linguist William Dwight Whitney, though we now know that restriction to sound is too narrow, can be any sensory motor medium. This long tradition was swept aside in the 20th century by behaviorist and structuralist currents, and it was forgotten, still virtually unknown. Modern approaches in the 20th century took language to be at its root a system of communication rather than a system of thought, perhaps evolved from animal communication. There's very strong reason to believe that the tradition was on the right track and should be carried forward. I'll assume that here. Well, returning to explanation, the task arises primarily at the higher level, inquiry into the faculty of language. It seems that any human infant anywhere in the world can acquire any language with comparable facility. That means that FL is a shared human property. There's also by now very substantial evidence that FL is unique to humans. Its fundamental properties have no analog in the animal world. If so, then FL is a true species property, shared by humans, unique to humans in its essentials. Famous evolutionary biologist Theodore Jobzhansky once observed that each species is unique, and humans, he said, are the uniquest of all. It's a fair guess that the language thought amalgam is the foundation of this uniqueness of our species. Well, FL must enable any human infant to acquire any language. Condition on UG that's been called explanatory adequacy. Sometimes it's called Plato's problem. It is a problem that goes back to the Platonic dialogues. It's formulated by Bertrand Russell a century ago. It's the problem of how we can know so much given so little evidence. In the case of language, it's the problem called poverty of stimulus. In the early days of the generative enterprise, mid-20th century, it was recognized that the poverty of stimulus problem was quite serious, and that standard formulas within behaviorist and structuralist frameworks will get nowhere. Their contemporary variants with supercomputers and astronomical amounts of data do no better. Just impossible in principle. These early conclusions were established more firmly as serious experimental inquiry was undertaken in later years into child language acquisition. It was found that the problem of poverty of stimulus is far more severe than had been assumed. By now, it's been quite solidly established that the knowledge of language of a 2 to 3-year-old child goes far beyond what they exhibit in behavior, and also that the gap between the data available to the child and the knowledge attained is vast, greatly deepens Plato's problem. These results seem to suggest that the faculty of language must be quite rich to yield complex knowledge from impoverished data, while at the same time, the faculty of language must somehow accommodate the wide variety of languages. That looks like a problem. The problem deepens when we turn to another condition that FL must satisfy, sometimes called Darwin's problem. How can FL have evolved under the conditions of human evolution? Evidence is fragmentary, but there are some quite plausible conclusions about these conditions. Modern humans appeared about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. We now have genomic evidence that the small group of humans began to separate not long after they appeared. All of them share the faculty of language, which must already have been in place. Prior to the appearance of modern humans, there's virtually no indication of significant symbolic activity in the archaeological record. Not long after their appearance, there's very rich evidence. Notice that these numbers are in evolutionary time, they're barely a flick of an eye. All of this suggests that FL appeared in a narrow window of time, pretty much along with modern humans. There's very strong evidence that it hasn't changed since. We would therefore expect FL to be very simple. We therefore face a conundrum. FL must be rich enough to handle Plato's problem, at the same time simple enough to deal with Darwin's problem, and the apparent wide diversity of languages, all determined by FL, lurks in the background. Serious conundrum, which in fact has guided much of theoretical inquiry for the last years. Well, for the first time, we're now getting to the point where we can see how the conundrum might be resolved. So let's turn to that. Let's begin with the problem of diversity. That problem would be greatly reduced if diversity of language is sequestered in a particular component of the overall system. The natural place to look is externalization, excluding the I language operations that yield the thought system. That move has initial plausibility. For I language, the poverty of stimulus problems are overwhelming, generally insurmountable. For externalization, at least there's direct evidence, what's heard, or for sign language, what's seen. Research has been tending towards showing that the variety, complexity, the easy mutability of language is indeed sequestered in externalization that leaves generation of thought relatively fixed, maybe completely fixed. We might someday discover that would vindicate an ancient tradition which took it for granted. Well, if this is true for language, would not be very surprising. Externalization is not, strictly speaking, language. Rather, it's an amalgam of the internal system for generation of thought, which is pure language, amalgam of them with sensory motor systems that have nothing to do with language. They were in place long before language appeared. They haven't changed at all since language did appear. So we might expect that the mapping of the internal language system into completely unrelated sensory motor systems would be a pretty complex task, solvable in many different ways. The so-called different languages easily subject to at least superficial change. And that's the way it seems to be. Well, if that's basically correct, then the poverty of stimulus problems reduce largely to externalization, maybe completely so. These topics have been the subject of extensive research for the past 40 years, since the principles and parameters framework was formulated, was the first approach that offered at least a potential framework for accounting for acquisition of language in a feasible manner. And there has been a good deal of progress in carrying out this program. No time to review it, but recently, Ian Roberts, linguist in Cambridge, England, has shown how very simple algorithms based on elementary cognitive principles can feasibly zero in on choice of parameters, fixing a particular language. He's tested the approach with thousands of languages of great typological variety. There's a great deal of related work along pretty much similar lines. I think we can say that the problem of variety of external systems is pretty well in hand in principle and to a considerable extent in practice. And if externalization is the primary, maybe the only locus of variation, a large part of the conundrum is on its way to resolution: variety and learnability. Well, to proceed further, let's turn to some concrete examples. I'll begin with the most fundamental property of human language, one that's quite surprising in many ways and has rich consequences. It's the property that's technically called structure dependence. For concreteness, let's briefly review some simple cases. So let's begin with the operation of interpreting sentences. For example, interpreting how a verb phrase is modified by an adverb. So consider the sentence, "The man who fixed the car carefully packed his tools." It's ambiguous. Could mean he fixed the car carefully, could mean he carefully packed his tools. Now put the adverb in the front. Carefully, the man who fixed the car packed his tools. It's unambiguous. Means carefully packed his tools. That poses a puzzle. The adverb in the initial position has to find a verb phrase to modify, but we ignore the simplest computation, find the closest verb phrase. That would be fix the car. We reflexively ignore it. We choose the more remote verb phrase, packed his tools. It becomes clear why, when you think about the structure of the sentence, the phrase packed his tools is actually closer to the adverb in the structure, in the abstract structure, than fix the car. And we attend to the abstract structure, though we never hear it, of course. There's actually more involved, but that's enough to bring out the basic puzzle. We ignore the simple computation on linear order of words. We reflexively carry out a computation on abstract structure. Well, take another example, anaphors, terms that don't refer themselves, but refer to some antecedent to get their reference. The simplest approach, simplest algorithm, is to seek the closest eligible antecedent. So if you have the sentence, the boys expect the girls to like each other, it's the girls who like each other, not the boys. You find the closest antecedent. But sometimes that fails. As in this sentence, for example, the friends of the boys like each other. Here, it's the friends that like each other, not the boys. Once again, reflexively, we ignore the simplest algorithm, which relies on what we hear, words in linear order, and we use a procedure that applies to abstract structures and is in fact pretty complex. You first have to identify the subject noun phrase, then you have to figure out what's the core element within the noun phrase and choose that as the antecedent. Well, these observations generalize. Structure dependence holds of all constructions in all languages. That means that from infancy and on through life, we reflexively ignore 100% of what we hear, words in linear order. We attend only to what we never hear, abstract structures generated by the mind and operations on these structures. Furthermore, experimental work has shown that this principle is known to infants as early as they can be tested, 2 years old or even less. And notice that this curious property is restricted to I language, generation of thought. Principle doesn't hold for externalization. There you use linear order and adjacency and nearness all the time. Well, there's a natural conclusion. In fact, about the only conclusion. I language and externalization are distinct systems. For I language, efficient computation ignores what is externalized. Furthermore, all of this must be part of the innately fixed, genetically determined faculty of language. Conclusion further supports the thesis that I language, language proper, is a system of generation of thought, as was assumed in the millennia-old tradition prior to the behaviorist structuralist revision of the 20th century. Well, it's plain why languages use linear order for externalization. It's required by the articulatory system, which cannot produce structures. In fact, sign language, which has the resources of visual space available, does not adhere strictly to linearization. Recall that the sensory motor organs used for externalization are unrelated to language in their nature and evolution. So it's not surprising that I language, pure language, ignores the properties imposed by these non-linguistic organs. Well, with this in mind, let's turn to the why questions. Why does universal grammar force structure dependence? The optimal answer to this would be that this follows from the simplest possible form of universal grammar of the faculty of language, using the simplest operation for generating expressions. The simplest operation is unbounded binary set formation. It's the basis for what's called merge in the literature. And in fact, structure dependence does follow directly from merge. So we have a complete explanation for the property of structure dependence. To put it metaphorically, when Mother Nature created language, she found the simplest possible solution, which is incidentally the way evolution works. in fact, the way all of science works, so it appears. That's actually been a driving intuition in science since Galileo, Origins of Modern Science. Over the centuries, it's been sharpened, strongly substantiated. By now, it's so broadly verified that Einstein called it the miracle creed that guides all serious inquiry. Nature finds the simplest possible solution. In the case of language, it's called the strong minimalist thesis, SMT. Reliance on merge as the sole structure building operation has many other crucial empirical consequences. I'll only be able to mention a few in the time available. There's a lot more in the literature and in progress. It's an evolving field. Reliance on merge as the sole structure building operation yields the basic property, generating an infinite array of hierarchically structured expressions. We need only add that the primitive elements of the system are elementary concepts. These are elaborated by merge. They become phrases you can translate directly into what's called event semantics. These phrases would be the syntactic exponents of participants in events. Program along these lines, if it can be fully carried out, would complete the theory of generation of thought. Externalization as an ancillary system, one with quite interesting properties, in part determined by the abstract I-language structures that it maps to the sensory motor system. I should add that the evolutionary origin of the most elementary concepts like tree, dog, person, river, house, simplest one you can think of. Their origin is a complete mystery, and it will probably remain a complete mystery. There are no analogs in the animal world. There's, of course, no record of their development. We can't go back a couple 100,000 years and see how these things developed. There are two logical possibilities for a merge of X and Y. Either the two are distinct or one is part of the other. The two options are called external and internal merge, respectively. External merge yields combination, as in read books. Internal merge yields displacement, as in which books did he read, where which books is understood to be the object of read. Here, what happened is the object of read is merged with the whole sentence, and you get which book did he read. Well, the strong minimalist thesis, the miracle creed, should not permit an operation of deletion, which would allow far richer systems. In externalization, deletion does take place under narrow conditions with interesting motivation and consequences. The motivation does not, however, apply to I-language. We therefore must assume that I-language has no deletion operations. So let's go back to the sentence, which books did you read? In I-language, it is which books did you read, which books? That's interpreted directly as for which books X, you read the books X, yields the thought. So merge automatically yields the phenomenon of displacement with reconstruction. It's a topic that's been extensively studied, but it falls out directly from the optimal system of generation just as structure dependence does. What reaches our mind in this case is which books did you read, which books? But what reaches the ear and reaches consciousness is which books did you read? Externalization removes all but one occurrence. One has to remain in place to indicate that the operation took place. That's a general economy condition, basically a law of nature, radically reducing both mental computation and execution of articulatory motions. The result of the simplest operations is to maximize computational efficiency, but it causes a problem for usage. It yields what's called a filler gap problem for perception and parsing. If any of you are working in natural language parsing, you'll know that that's one of the main problems. The parser finds a which phrase, a WH phrase, like which books, the beginning of the sentence, has to find the gap that it fills for the interpretation. Turns out to be quite a complex problem, one of the major problems in parsing. The problem would be radically reduced if the gap were filled, but Mother Nature didn't care about that when designing language. Mother Nature insisted on finding the most elegant solution, even though it poses difficulties for language use, quite serious difficulties as sentences become more complex. This is one of many cases where optimal design conflicts with communicative efficiency. Invariably, communicative efficiency is sacrificed. That's more evidence for the traditional conception of language as fundamentally a system of thought. Of course, it's used for communication and much else, but these are incidental properties. All of this is consistent with how evolution proceeds quite generally. Schematically, thinking about evolution, we can distinguish several stages. So you begin with some system, let's say a bacterium. First, some disruption takes place, maybe a mutation or a genetic drift or gene transfer, or maybe a bacterium swallowing another microorganism by accident. That seems to be the breakthrough that led to complex cells. If it hadn't happened, we'd all still be bacteria. Second stage is reconstruction. Nature reconstructs the new system in the simplest way, observing the miracle creed, pays no attention to how the new entity might be used. The third stage is winnowing. The outcomes that reproduce more effectively prevail. That's natural selection. That suggests a reasonable scenario for language evolution. First, some minor rewiring of the brain took place, yielding the new property of recursive enumeration. Next step is reconstruction. Nature devises the simplest, most elegant way to organize the new system. That's the strong minimalist thesis, the miracle creed. The computational principles are just given, they're part of natural law. The winnowing stage apparently was never reached. We all have the same faculty of language. Maybe that's just because of lack of time. We're pretty recent creatures. Maybe, more interestingly, it's because the optimal system is so delicately designed that it's either all or none. Could be the case, recent work suggests. Well, we're approaching an interesting conclusion. Language might be perfect and a common human possession. This was proposed 25 years ago as the strong minimalist thesis. At that time, it was not regarded as realistic. Rather, it was regarded as a kind of a long-term perspective that might guide research. But recent work suggests something more audacious. Thesis might indeed be true, as evolutionary theory leads us to suspect, along with science generally, and as empirical inquiry increasingly suggests. There's a good deal of further evidence for these conclusions. No time to review it here. It remains to show how far we can extend such reasoning. Needless to say, that's an extremely challenging task. Nothing like it has ever arisen in the study of language and thought in the last millennia. There are promising early steps far beyond what could have been imagined only a few years ago. Well, one final remark. The strong minimalist thesis has several functions. One of them is a disciplinary function. It sharply restricts the options for description. It therefore deepens explanation. But it also has an enabling function. It provides options for what language might be, for what systems of language might exist. An interesting question now coming into view is to explore whether languages make use of all the possibilities enabled by the strong minimalist thesis. Might be more than just a guideline for inquiry, as assumed in the past, might actually express a fundamental truth about the nature of language and thought, the most distinctive possessions of our strange species, and the basis for our uniqueness. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky, for your thought-provoking talk on language and the Miracle Creed. Your insights and ideas have challenged us to think more deeply about the nature of language and its place in human cognition. We're really grateful for the opportunity to have learned from your vast knowledge and experience. Now, are you able to answer some questions from the audience? Yeah. All right. We have here one question. First, you say that in the 20th century, the concept of knowledge as a system of thought was swept away in favor of the concept of language as a system of communication. What do you think is the reason for this? Does this have anything to do with high capitalism, increased consumerism, and the rise of the information industry?
It started before that, started in the early 20th century. I think the main impact was behaviorism. Behaviorism says, let's just look at what we see, not pay attention to what lies behind it. That happened to come along with the structuralist movement in linguistics, which made many contributions, but also restricted itself to what you see. If you've studied structural linguistics, you know that it's basically a system of procedures of analysis which you apply to a corpus of material to give you what's called a compact representation of the corpus. That both of these approaches look at the phenomena themselves, not at what lies behind them. Same is true of the fashionable large language models. They just look at a corpus of material, don't try to find out what lies behind it. Well, in the early 20th century, that was regarded as very scientific. It's actually radically opposed to the sciences. The sciences don't, Galileo, for example, didn't look at leaves blowing in the wind and say, okay, how can we describe leaves blowing in the wind? He tried to find out the principles that lie behind the phenomena that we observe. That's in fact why scientists do experiments. Every experiment is a radical abstraction from phenomena. That's the point of an experiment. It's to try to throw out the irrelevant factors and see if you can focus on the essential ones. Experiments are always driven by theories that say, here's what we think is the essential thing. Let's try to design an experimental, throw out everything else. In fact, many of the experiments through the history of science, from Galileo to Einstein to the present, are just thought experiments. You don't actually carry them out. You just think what ought to happen. Well, those principles were led to the shift towards looking at communication as the core of language. That's what you see. You don't see people thinking. That's going on in the head. You only get to see that when you begin to try to find explanations for what's going on, when you enter the actual sciences. And then I think we find that the behaviorist structuralist approach and the large language model approach today are just departing from the sciences. By now, there is, to get back to the question, a strong impact of contemporary capitalism. The large language models are, of course, come straight out of Silicon Valley, which is trying very hard to try to encourage the use of its products. So there's an enormous amount of exaggeration and fantasy about what these things can do. It's also drawing lots of people into these areas and away from actual science. That is the effect of high capitalism.
Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky. Here's another question. You have always argued that FL is a shared human property, that all infants have the innate ability to learn language. Have you ever observed this in your personal life, perhaps with children or grandchildren?
Well, of course, I've observed it with children and grandchildren. In fact, my children and grandchildren have to have a pretty wide varieties of language. So one of my daughters moved to Nicaragua. She's a fluent speaker of Spanish. Her two children are fluent speakers of Nicaraguan Spanish. They moved in the 1980s during the Sandinista years. One of these granddaughters, of my granddaughters, Spanish speaker, married an African from the Congo. So their child, my great-grandchild, is a speaker of, right now he's 2 years old, so he's just learning, but he's learning English, Spanish, and the Congolese language of his father, all perfectly in parallel. There's no difference as far as he's concerned. And it's not just a matter of personal experience. This has been found by extensive field research. You find an Amazonian tribe or a tribe in Papua New Guinea, which hasn't had human contact for 20,000 years. Put them in an English-speaking environment, they become a fluent English speaker. And conversely, if a child from Cambridge, Massachusetts is taken to the Amazon and raised there, he'll be an Amazonian child. It's not just language, all cognitive capacities, as far as we know. No one's been able to find any distinction among them. This is essentially the most interesting case is the groups that separated from the main human stock about 150,000 years ago. Here we have genomic evidence about the separation. These are what are called the San people in Southern Africa. And they have the same faculty of language, but interestingly, they have a somewhat different form of externalization. These are the languages that use what are called clicks. I'm not capable of making them, but if I'd grown up there, I could use them. Sort of clicks that are made there, and they have a whole variety of clicks that are interspersed in the language. These are the only languages that use them, and all of them use them. So it seems that there's interesting research on this, which suggests that the faculty of language emerged with humans, but externalization may have developed after the separation, which was very soon.
Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky. There are a lot of questions. Here's another one. How can the ideas discussed in your talk be applied or integrated into other areas of study, such as artificial intelligence?
Well, artificial intelligence, when it was originally founded back in the 1950s by Alan Turing, Herbert Simon, Marvin Minsky, others, people I knew incidentally, was intended as part of science. It was intended to be part of the then emerging field of cognitive science. That version of artificial intelligence has been pretty much abandoned. For those of you in the field, you'll know that it's dismissed as what's sometimes called good old-fashioned artificial intelligence. We don't do that anymore. What's done now is a pure engineering project, no connection with science. Let's take an astronomical amount of data, huge corpus, throw a bunch of supercomputers at it, set up 1 trillion parameters, and see if we can find statistical regularities in the huge mass of data, which will enable us to produce things that look more or less like the kind of things that would have been in the corpus. That's the chatbots, the large language models. That's very remote from original AI. It's maybe useful, maybe harmful, but it's not part of science like AI was originally. So as to the question, integration of what I've been talking about with AI was automatic in the early stage. AI was just part of the cognitive sciences, just as the study of languages, which wanted to use the technology available to see if you can, and the ideas available in computational science to see if you could advance the study of the nature of human intelligence. But by now that's been abandoned. And there's just another project, engineering project, which again may produce useful devices, produce harmful ones, but it's not part of science.
Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky. Here's a related question. Granted that AI learns differently from human beings in terms of generating and describing new information, with AI only learning through language models and human beings learning from neuroplasticity, does that necessarily imply that the value of information generated by AI will always be less than those generated by human beings?
It's not less or more, it's just something totally different. What the large language models do is they don't basically learn anything. It's not anything like learning. What they do is scan astronomical amounts of data, supercomputers, you can do it very fast, see if you can find statistical regularities, then use those statistical regularities to try to put together something that looks more or less like the corpus of data. It's not learning. It's kind of a high-tech plagiarism, basically. That's not learning. The same is true of the visual AI, constructing images and putting them together to make it look like a work of art. What they're doing is scanning astronomical numbers of images, seeing if they can find regularities, which you can then put together. Actually, there's another part of this story which isn't discussed very much. There's a huge human contribution to all of these systems. There are huge numbers of poor people, mostly in India, other poor countries, mostly women, being paid horrible wages just to classify and mark images so that they'll be usable by these systems. That's another aspect of the system that isn't talked about. But there isn't anything that you can call learning or anything like that. It's very much like, it is a kind of plagiarism. If you go to an art museum, you'll find students, art students, sitting in front of the paintings by masters and trying to duplicate them. It's where you learn technique, the master's technique. And a good skilled artist can make very precise replications of a master. In fact, it takes a skilled art historian, sometimes using high technology, to distinguish the original from the replication. But the replication isn't creating a work of art. It's duplicating it. And this is basically a form of that.
Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky. Actually, there are a lot of questions. Maybe last one question. I don't know enough of how chatbot works, but I'm trying to square what you have said today about the possibility of language being perfect, that it is innate and that we ignore the linear progression of language. Can you say more about the language models of chatbots?
There are none. There are no language models. What there is scanning an astronomical amount of data to see if you can find some statistical regularities. It's not a language model. There's nothing there. I mean, you can produce things that way that look kind of like normal language use. Maybe it's useful for search, kind of like Google search. So if you want to, you can ask a question and it'll scan through its astronomical amount of data. It may find something in the data that answers your question, but there's no models, there's no learning. The proof of that is what I said. These systems work just as well for impossible systems that humans cannot learn as they do for actual systems. So to repeat the analogy I mentioned, it's like a biologist who says, I have a theory that can list a lot of possible organisms, a lot of impossible organisms, and I can tell you nothing about the difference. That's not a theory of biology. Doesn't tell you anything about biology. That's essentially what these things are. Maybe they're useful. In fact, there's some cases where they actually are. They are very harmful. In fact, they're so harmful that, as you may know, a couple of thousand of the leading practitioners just signed a petition calling for a moratorium on their development because they are very harmful. For one thing, they're a terrific source of disinformation. Anybody working with these things can produce what looks like language, but is completely fabricated. They're a wonderful technique of defamation. So if somebody wants to defame you, they can take things you've said, produce something more or less like it that's totally insane, make an image of you, artificial image of you, make it look as if you're saying those things. That's already been done. It was done with the Pope recently, an artificial image made of the Pope producing some idiotic comment. Well, it's a wonderful technique of defamation. It also plays on people's gullibility, which is very serious. People think that these things are real. They ask them questions like, should I take a job somewhere? Should I leave my family? An answer comes back and people take it seriously. It has very dangerous consequences. There are already many documented cases like that. So they do cause enormous harm and will cause a lot more. They may be also of some benefit, but it's because of this reason that there are calls for a moratorium on their development. But whatever the answer to this question is, it has nothing to do with science and understanding.
Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky. We've already exceeded time, so we will now listen to the closing message from Dr. Chini Dino Aparicio, Acting Dean, Far Eastern University Institute of Education.
Thank you, Sir Mabu. And of course, thank you, Sir Professor Chomsky. On behalf of FEU Institute of Education, I express sincerest gratitude to our speaker, Professor Noam Chomsky, the father of modern linguistics, for bringing out thought-provoking concepts in linguistics. Indeed, there are a lot of areas to investigate dealing with the complexity of language. And a great deal of interest was seen in the future of artificial intelligence. There's like a big room to discuss further about this. We're very glad having Professor Chomsky in this set 3, or we call it the series of expert talks, a special activity by the FEU Institute of Education, Graduate Studies, and Transnational Education, primarily for our language programs in the Institute, such as PhD in Educational Linguistics, we have Doctor of Education in Literature and Language Studies, and Master of Arts in English Language. So as we hold true to our commitment to education, we continuously extend this activity beyond our programs. This is our way of realizing our agenda in contributing to our country's education. And today, among Filipino language enthusiasts. With this, allow me to acknowledge the following offices for making this event possible. Far Eastern University's Office of the Chair, Office of the President, the Office of the Academic Affairs, Academic Development, Academic Services, and Corporate Affairs. For manning the tech team this morning, we thank the following offices: Marketing and Communication, Educational Technology, and Information Technology Services. Of course, we thank the Office of the Graduate Studies and the Institute of Education, especially the Graduate Studies Chair, Romualdo Mabuan, or we call him Mabu, who made this invitation to Professor Chomsky happen today. Above all this, we thank you, our participants in Zoom and live, our graduate and undergraduate students, the faculty who joined us today. Truly wanted to extend further But definitely, we were not able to see time pass because it was a very interesting talk and discussion that we had this morning. We look forward to seeing you in our future activities in the Far Eastern University Institute of Education. Professor Chomsky, maraming salamat po, and to all that had joined us here in Set 3. Thank you very much and see you in our future activities.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chini. Again, thank you so much, Professor Chomsky. This is a rare moment, rarest of the rare moment, an epic and historic event for all of us here in the Philippines. Personally, I will never forget this moment with you. Thank you and have a great evening. Would you like to say some words more, Professor Chomsky, to your Filipino fans and audience?
Just that it's a great pleasure to be with you. And as I said before, I hope one of these days can make it an actual visit to meet you personally. But for now, very pleased to have had this opportunity.
Professor Chomsky, whenever you want, just let us know. We will make it happen. There is a great interest in your work here in the Philippines and the Southeast Asian region.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Could we pose for a quick group photo with this rare event?
Yes. May we request everybody to open their cameras, please? Thank you.
All right. 3.
Hi.
It's MJ.
It's MJ and Sir Ian, if you're good. Dr. Isa.
If Sir Ian.
We are now taking photos. Please put on your best smile. Thank you.
All right. Again, thank you so much, Professor Chomsky. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Love you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.